Alright, good afternoon YouTube, Fairface here. Just doing an oil change on my 2015 XT250 and I thought of why not just do a video, because I did a search on YouTube and there's not very many videos on doing oil changes on these. Especially since the 2015 is slightly different than the older XTs. So that change happened in 2013, so not just the 2015. But anyway, so I thought I'd do a layman's kind of how to do an oil change, because I think a lot of people that buy these are cheap bikes, especially used. They don't really, a lot of people don't work on their bikes and don't realize how easy it truthfully is to do an oil change. So I thought I'd just do simple. I'm going to go over all the tools and everything that you need, and it shouldn't be that hard.
Oh, fuck. Woo! It's okay, I'm just laying down. You alright? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, shit. Oh. Oh. It's like...
Alright, so first and foremost, you need something to catch the oil. I have this oil drain from Ace Hardware. If memory serves, I think it was 20 bucks. This is probably one of my favorites. A lot of the ones that Walmart sells are pretty cheap, and they end up breaking over time, especially the caps. So this is one I recommend. I've used it for a while now, more than a few years, and it's held up pretty well. Then the next thing is going to be, you're going to need some, of course, wrenches and sockets, which I think most people got pretty easily. I'd say you don't really probably need the extension, but you'll need a 14 millimeter for the fill plug, and you're going to need a 12 millimeter socket for the drain plug. So that should be simple enough. Oil filter, I highly recommend every time you do an oil change, just go ahead and do the oil filter. They're not expensive, and check this little tiny filter out. I mean, this thing blows my mind. This is a KN 140 KN oil filter. It's pretty much the only thing that they had. So anyway, I think it was $5, so not expensive, but little tiny oil filter. So we'll be showing you that, and then just for GWiz info, your oil filters in there, and the 2015s, 2013 onward now require a 5 millimeter Allen wrench to get into there. Used to have regular, I think, old screws or bolts on there. But that's since changed. So that's most of what you need. And oil-wise, I generally use a 10W40 Castrol. Good oil, nothing special. I mean, to be truthfully honest, I do oil changes so often on these, I don't think it really matters. Oil capacity, the 2015 XT250 it takes 1.3 liters or 1.37 quarts. So basically, these come in liters. Most of the oil that I buy do come in liters. So, one full one and then a third of another, and of course I always run the bike and heat it up and heat cycle it and check the oil level, which is super easy on the little oil window on the XTs. Alright, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll get underneath here and I'll show you what else we gotta do. Alright, so first things first, before you go and pull out your drain plug, I always recommend pulling out your fill plug, because what happens if your fill plug seizes and you drain your oil out. Plus, I think the air coming in up top helps all the oil drain out a little bit better. So that's step one. There. Right now I switch over to your 12 millimeter. Shouldn't need any sort of extension for this. Alright, should be pretty easy. This is pretty self-explanatory. Wait. There we go. So we're going to put you in there. Highly recommend having some paper towels on handy. I don't think I grabbed any, but we'll see if I make a big mess or not. Another note about this before I let this go is, notice how the drain plug is on the side of the bike that the kickstand leans. Now generally I'd recommend doing the bike, at least moving it upright while you're draining it, but since the drain plug is actually on this side of the block, I don't see any reason to straighten the bike upright. And by the way, this is my first oil change on the XT250 for you guys that follow me. There we go, and that's some pretty dark oil. So this is our first oil change, and I got exactly 500 miles on it. So another thing I recommend, which I didn't grab one, but I always highly recommend magnetic drain plugs. It gets any metal parts and pieces in the engine floating around out of there, so that's always good too. That'll be my next purchase. Another thing I recommend is doing your oil change while it's been sitting for a while and the bike's cold. Certainly it lets all the oil kind of drain to the bottom of the engine, and because when you're just running it was just hot, you got all the oil that was cycling around the top of the engine and the valves and such. So doing it cold, I think you get more of the old oil out, but it's not the end of the world either way. An oil change is an oil change. And I do my oil change intervals, depending on how hard, or I usually try to do it every 3 or 4 dirt bike trips, or no more than 1,000 miles riding out here, to be honest. But I'm sure you could probably get closer to 2,000 to 3,000 if you're just riding down the street. All right, so once it starts dripping or not much is coming out anymore, just put the your drain plug back in, and I kind of clean up around it as I go. You'll probably never get all the oil out of it, but I let it drip for a little while. Just tighten it back up before you move on to your oil filter. And just having these fairly snug is, pretty much all you need. No need to go Rambo on it. All right, good. All right, so next step is going to be the oil filter, which by and large, I'm not gonna lie to you, is generally the more messy prospect. But we'll see. I've never done one on this bike, so I'm hoping it's not too bad. A trick of mine that I generally use is to start and run the motor for a second or two before I move on to doing the oil filter, but I like to see what it does first time when I pop it open. Alright, for this you'll need the 5mm. I like to break loose all the bolts before I loosen any one. That just helps getting it off, I think. Oop, the other two are snug for me. There's a little rubber seal in here, as with most bikes, and it'll keep the, if you keep pressure on it, you can usually get all the bolts out before oil starts coming out, but we'll see what happens with this one. I certainly have some paper towels on hand for this. So the longer one goes on the top right. And your other two bolts on the top left and bottom are the same size, so it shouldn't be any worries getting these right or wrong. Oh wow, that made no mess at all. Check that out. So there's where your oil filter goes. Nice and nasty from our first go out. So that was easy. And she'll probably just pop off just like that. Looks like the rubber had gotten kind of hot and kind of not really melted, but kind of formed around the inside of there. But that's your old reused filter. That's the original one that came with the bike. So leave that one there. I like to wipe up everything. I always leave a little bit of oil in that rubber, the rubber seal there, because it keeps the rubber lubricated and from drying out, especially out here in Colorado. Alrighty, there, there's my new one. Alright, we'll get the K&N going here. So it should be pretty easy to tell which side goes onto the oil cover. You can see there's a closed side there, and then an open side there. The little thing that pokes out obviously has got to go on the open side. Didn't quite work that way, so unless you really want to get her on that direction, it ain't going to work. So should be easy enough for you. And it'll probably fit pretty loosely when you stick it on here. So you'll see on the inside there's a little indentation for the other side of this oil filter. So she should slip right on in there. In fact, I'll put her in there. I think is the easier way to do it because it generally holds better. There you go. And I'll clean up a little bit around here before we go ahead and slap her back on. Putting it on the right direction always helps, right? Alright, just start putting bolts back in. Just remember the long one goes in the top right. And I just kind of snug them up finger tight up until I get all of them on there. Alright, once you get them finger tight, I just probably start with the first one and just kind of do a couple turns, move on to the next one, do a couple turns, then on to the next, do a couple turns, and then tighten her up. Now once again, these don't got to be super duper tight, because one thing you absolutely don't want to do on your block here is strip out your threads in here. It's a huge nightmare to either rethread this or buy a whole new case if you really mess it up. So, that should be good. Alright, so now to add the oil. So, I think somebody stole one of my funnels. So, getting inventive, I used a daisy ice or a sour cream thing and just cut the bottom out and rolled it into a funnel, basically. So, this will either work or be terrible. So, 1.3 liters. So, that's what we're going to put in. Each one of these is a liter, so that should make the math pretty easy. Seems to be working pretty good so far. So the measurement I gave you for 1.3 liters, that's for with doing the filter. It's 1.2 liters without, which is pretty much adds up to being one and the same. So these bikes thumpers in general are pretty known for using a little bit of oil. So don't worry about too much about that. All right, so right now I'm gonna go ahead and pull the funnel out and throw the plug back on, fire it up, let her warm up, and check the oil level. All right, so once you get your fill plug back on there nice and snug, just go ahead and fire her up. So another thing, the purpose of starting the bike and checking the oil level after you heat it up is to also make sure none of everything you just took off is going to leak. So it's important to check your drain plug while it's running, and it's important to check around your oil filter. So that's pretty much about it. This is a pretty simple bike. Looks like nothing's leaking for me. Alright, so the purpose of riding it around the block and stuff to get the oil flowing and stuff, I rode it around for probably about 5-10 minutes and stop the engine. Usually my procedure is to get it nice and warm and then let it sit for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes before you check the oil. It just kind of lets all the oil that you just forced up into the engine drain down a little bit and gives you a little bit more accurate idea of actually what your oil level is. And then as always, you're going to want to check your oil on a level surface and level the bike as well. Alright, so you can see there I got it full, a little bit past the full line, which ain't going to hurt anything. I put just just about a third exactly, so that filled it up a little bit past its full mark, which is fine. I know I didn't put too much oil, so I think if you put 1.5 liters, that's probably too much, and I didn't put 1.5 liters. I stopped a little bit before that, so a little bit over full. It certainly ain't gonna hurt anything. And these bikes, the XT250 does use oil as a whole. I think my first trip around, you know, and of course being a new engine breaking in, a lot of the parts settling, but I was started at above the full mark, and by the time I got to the 500 mile point, I'd used the oil just about down to the low mark. So definitely before you ride, every single time, you should check your oil. Make sure that your oil's at least at minimum or higher, but I always recommend being a full. All right, guys, so that's about it. That's an oil change on a 2015 XT250. That's all I got for you guys. So find a trail, have some fun. Fair face out.